So I did a compilation playlist of the best Beatles songs, so why not do the Rolling Stones next? In the 60s, the Rolling Stones were often considered the Beatles' direct competitors. Yeah, there was the Dave Clark Five, Herman's Hermits, but the Stones seemed to have the longest staying power. Partially because they were seen as the antithesis of the Beatles, the bad boys of rock and roll. Ironically, the Stones and the Beatles were actually good friends. Lennon and McCartney actually wrote I Wanna Be Your Man for their first single, and purposely avoided releasing their records at the same time. What makes the Rolling Stones more difficult to make a compilation out of is that they've been around so long. I mean, they're still playing to this day. That's almost 60 years of music. So how do you condense 6 decades of material into one compilation? Well, to be honest, I'm really not going to. The truth of the matter is, there's a classic period of the Stones that seems to have ended around the early 80s. That's the last time they had top 10 singles. And while I do like some of their songs that came out in the 90s or the 2000s, they're just not the same as their old classics. And the truth of the matter is that my personal favorite period of the Stones, remember I'm personalizing this playlist, is when Mick Taylor was in the band from 1969 to 1974. It's also when their songs started getting a lot longer, which makes my vinyl album restrictions even harder to conform to. But I think I've come up with a pretty good list here. 1981 is going to be our cutoff date, and as with the previous compilation, we're going to format it like it's a vinyl record, no more than 26 minutes a side. So, let's get rolling here. No pun intended. Full disclosure, I'm not as big a fan of their early to mid-60s catalog as others are. Sure, they had good songs, but they just don't hit me as hard as their later stuff. Still, I'd be remiss if I didn't include Satisfaction. It's just a classic rock and roll track. Everybody has talked about that famous fuzz-tone guitar riff. Even I talked about it at length in the History of Rock series. And it sounds like this. Keith Richards originally just laid it down as a guide, thinking it was going to be replaced by a horn section. Fortunately, the guitar riff was kept in, and rock history was made. I love the story that Keith basically wrote it in his sleep. And Mick Jagger's lyrics are almost a precursor to punk, rebelling against the commercialism of the day and good old sexual frustration. Who can't identify with that? We're gonna jump to 1968 to another classic rocker, Jumpin' Jack Flash. This is still one of my favorite songs to cover, and that riff is a lot like Satisfaction, it never leaves your head. Supposedly, Bill Wyman came up with that riff on piano. That's him playing organ at the end with Keith taking the bass. I can barely understand what Mick is singing, but hey, it wouldn't be a Stones song if you could. Not much more to say except it's a gas, gas, gas. God, that joke is so lame. Now getting into Beggar's Banquet, let's highlight the Stones' own version of Revolution, Street Fighting Man, one of their most politically charged tunes. Keith's playing acoustic guitars, but the way they're overdriven through a cassette player of all things, you'd swear they're distorted electric guitars. Also credit Brian Jones for his sitar textures, along with Dave Mason playing the shinai at the end. And to top it all off, these are some of Mick's best lyrics. What can a poor boy do except to sing in a rock and roll band? I can identify with that. And we'll follow that track with the 1969 single Honky Tonk Women. This one's got a funky feel to it as Charlie kicks it off, along with producer Jimmy Miller playing the cowbell.
I gotta have more cowbell!
And from then on, it's just a Keith open G riff extravaganza. The lyrics are a lot of fun, just so many innuendos on Mick's part. She blew my nose and then she blew my mind. Where do you even begin with that? This is also the first single to include Mick Taylor on guitar, sadly replacing Brian Jones, who would die a short time after. Fortunately, Taylor turned out to be a solid addition to the lineup. His licks here are tastefully done, and a nice counterpoint to Keith's rhythm and guitar solo. From here we come to 1969's Let It Bleed, and this is where their album started getting really good. And Let It Bleed has the best lead-off track of any Stones record, Gimme Shelter. This is really the first Stones tune I remember getting into, partially because it was in Goodfellas. Starting off with another classic open G Keith riff, the way everything builds on top of each other creates an almost dystopian backdrop, like climbing out of the rubble of a war-torn city. Keith is also the only guitarist on the song, but the real star of the show is Mary Clayton, who sings that gut-wrenching vocal solo. This is one of the best vocals I've ever heard in a rock song. The way her voice cracks on the third line, and then somebody goes, "Woo!" It's just the coolest thing in the world. I kinda debated including this tune, mostly because of the length, but I'd be a fool not to include You Can't Always Get What You Want. It's practically a 60s anthem, like their version of Hey Jude. I never knew what to think of the track starting off with the London Bach Choir, but it definitely makes this tune memorable. And once Keith comes in with that acoustic guitar, we're off. This might be my favorite Mick Jagger vocal. You can tell he's got a lot of passion for this tune, still does to this day. Definitely a heavy Bob Dylan influence, but it just seems to capture the psychedelic 60s in a way that only Mick can deliver. So that's going to close out side 1. Moving on to side 2 and a new decade, Sticky Fingers is my favorite Stones record. And my followers seem to agree with me on that. If you were to ask me what's my all-time favorite Stones song, it'd probably be Can't You Hear Me Knockin'. I don't know how many casual fans know this song, but it's definitely a favorite among diehards. I mean, just those opening riffs from Keith alone deserve a highlight. But what separates this song from others is that Santana-style jam that follows the main part. Apparently it was just improvised on the spot and they kept the recording going, and yet somehow it's pretty seamless. With Keith blasting another memorable riff, he's joined by Billy Preston on organ, Rocky Dijon on percussion, and Bobby Keys blowing one of his best solos. As a kid, I was kind of obsessed with Mick Taylor's guitar solo, and it really is one of his best. Great tone, great dynamics. I love the way Bobby Keys interweaves with him at the end. It's arguably the best solo on any Stones record. I could include the entire Sticky Fingers album, really, but I probably should diversify a bit. For now, let's move on to their double LP, Exile on Main Street. What's difficult about this record is that it works best as a whole. There's not a ton of songs that stand out on their own, with a couple exceptions, most notably Tumblin' Dice. With this song, we're kind of back to the more conventional rockers like Jumpin' Jack Flash. This time, Mick Jagger is on guitar, and Mick Taylor is playing bass. Add in those gospel-style backups, a Stax-style horn section with Bobby Keys and Jim Price, some gambling and Dice lyrics being a pseudonym for, well, sex. And you got yourself another rock and roll classic. 1973's Goat's Head Soup is kind of an underappreciated album, and I could include quite a few songs from here. The blues rockers Silver Train, Angie, one of their most loved ballads. But the song I really love is Heartbreaker. No. I mean do Heartbreaker. Again, tapping into a more political subject, Heartbreaker is pretty relevant to what's going on today as it pertains to an incident where an NYC police officer shot and killed a 10-year-old boy, mistaking him for a robber. The anger is clearly felt in Mick's voice and also echoed by Billy Preston's funky clav, which kicks the song off. Those horns, I mean, damn, the Stones could really get down when they wanted to. Let's jump way forward to the early 80s and give Ron Wood some love. Possibly considered their last classic single, Start Me Up was the first Stones song I remember hearing, probably in a car commercial. It's actually a holdover from the 1978 Some Girls sessions, initially envisioned as a reggae tune. Fortunately, they went with the rock vein, and it's another one of my favorite openings to a Stones record. You hear those opening notes on Keith's Open G Telly, and you instantly know what song it is. I also love that Charlie Watts' snare comes in on the 1, creating sort of a musical anacrusis. You're not quite sure where the beat is. And yeah, the last line, "You make a dead man come," is both disgusting and awesome at the same time. And now we come back to Sticky Fingers, and I really can't think of a more perfect ending for this playlist than Moonlight Mile, my vote for their most gorgeous ballad. Even though Keith wrote that opening acoustic guitar riff, that's actually Mick Jagger playing it. And supposedly Mick Taylor had a big hand in writing the tune, despite not getting credit. Mick sings another one of his best vocals, the love-themed lyrics full of evocative images and, of course, drug references. With a head full of snow. Head full of snow. I think we all know what that means. And his final vamp straight up sounds like Van Morrison, which I'm a huge fan of. The band also comes up with some creative parts here. Charlie using mallets, Jim Price playing piano, a lush string arrangement by Paul Buckmaster of Elton John fame, and it's another showcase for Mick Taylor's melodic guitar playing. The final instrumental vamp is so beautiful, there's nothing that can top it, which is why it ends this playlist. I know this seemed a little more focused on one era of the Stones' career as opposed to the Beatles compilation, but it does represent most of my favorites. So now let's move on to some bonus tracks. Again, we're only going with 6 songs. To get another early single in there, I'm including 19th Nervous Breakdown. Always loved this song. Great guitar riffs from both Keith and Brian Jones, especially the breakdown, tongue-in-cheek lyrics, and a nice dive bomb and bass from Bill Wyman to finish the song. I'm also including Sympathy for the Devil, mostly because I feel like a lot of fans would be disappointed if I didn't. With lyrics about Lucifer, and especially killing the Kennedys, this obviously caused a lot of controversy when it came out. What? The Stones controversy? What really seals the deal for me is Keith's biting guitar solo, often referred to as one of the best in rock history, and it's easy to see why. You really do feel like you're going to hell when you hear this solo, but it's like a hell you want to go to, if that makes any sense. Moving forward to 1970, and a tune that should have been on my main compilation but couldn't because of the length, it's the live version of Midnight Rambler from Get Your Ya-Ya's Out. The song itself is a very unique shuffle, a blues opera as Keith refers to it as. It's a very dark song about a serial killer, but somehow Mick manages to make the lyrics very tongue-in-cheek. Mick really gets a chance to show off his harmonica skills while still singing great, even live. And all the many parts, time changes, stops on this tune add to the epic nature of the song. The real reason I include the live version over the studio take from Let It Bleed is really Mick Taylor's guitar playing, which weaves perfectly with Keith's riffs. It's one that should be on the main compilation, but we'd have to lose 2 tunes because of it, so it has its place here. And we're coming back to Sticky Fingers. I mean, honestly, I haven't even included Brown Sugar, Bitch, and one that I really should include is Wild Horses, another one of their most loved ballads, but I just can't live without Sway. It's not the most memorable in terms of melody, though I think the lyrics about the decadence of life are identifiable, and the guitar riff, played by Mick Jagger himself, is quite fun. The real reason it's included here is that final jam between Mick Taylor's lead guitar and Nicky Hopkins' piano, all while a flurry of strings accompanies them. Again, Mick Taylor just shreds on this song, and it's always been a favorite of mine, even since I was a kid, so for selfish reasons, I'm including Sway, and hopefully some casual fans can discover it as well. I probably should include a Keith Richards vocal. Most would cite Happy from Exile, but my favorite vocal of his is on Coming Down Again from Goat's Head Soup. I feel like it's one of his most revealing moments in the Stones. His battle with addiction is obviously the subject matter of the chorus, but it also delves into his complicated friendship with Brian Jones. Specifically how he, well, took his girl from him, Anita Pallenberg. You can definitely hear Keith's mixed emotions over this whole ordeal here. Another gorgeous ballad. How to end this? Should I do another Exile tune? Another early tune? You know, we haven't delved into Some Girls yet. I'm sure most fans would want me to add either the disco hit Miss You or another classic ballad, Beast of Burden. And they're both fun songs, but I'm gonna go with the last song on this album, Shattered. I'm also including the song as a tribute to my Uncle Bruce, who's currently in the hospital right now. Love you, Bruce. And the personal affiliation I have with the song is that he used to have a cassette tape which had Shattered on it, and then it played over and over again in a loop. I have a good memory of it. It's kind of weird to hear Mick rapping a year before Rapper's Delight even came out. But he does a good job with it, rapping about how dirty, decadent, and crime-infested New York City was in the 1970s. On top of that, Keith's guitar riff is quite hypnotic, Ronnie plays bass and sneaks in a neat solo, and Charlie's holding it all down. I think that's a good place to stop. I mean, we gotta stop somewhere. We still got 4 decades with this band to cover if we didn't. So that's my compilation. Again, I'll include a playlist in the description below. But what are your favorite Stones songs? Or do you have a favorite period of the Stones? Comment below and let me know what other band you'd like me to cover. I wonder who's next. Oh.